Today I'm going to be making a junk journal that I told myself I wasn't going to make. So when I did my 2026 lineup, I thought I've got exactly what I need and I don't need to make any more journals. And then, as always happens, I see something and I think, well, that would make the perfect journal. So my friend Daisy, who I host the Crafting podcast with, she sent me this vintage gem for Christmas, and it was filled with old photos and all sorts of ephemera and bits and pieces. And when I opened this, I was just like, well, this has to be a journal. Like, do you not see how this would make a perfect journal? And so I thought, well, I guess I can make an exception, seeing as it's this, and it's a folder that I assume the prints that you ordered would arrive in. And so I think this would make a really great journal cover because it is a tri-fold. So there's loads of possibilities in terms of how I can add pages, and there's even this part in the middle here that has almost like a belly band sort of situation, which I can add some extra bits in as well. So there's this piece here that would also lend itself really well to a journal cover as well, because you have the pockets there on the inside. But just to show you here the belly band that this has. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some pages on this side and also on this side. So having two lots of pages in this journal, so smaller signatures, probably not as many pages, so it's not as bulky, but just that way then I get more options in terms of the page layout and having the two signatures, and then it can obviously fold together like this. And so as you can see, I've gathered all sorts of bits of papers. I've got like recycled papers, packaging. I've got some plainer papers as well, some brown papers, some parchment paper, scrapbook paper. Like, I've got it all out here ready just to see what might fit with this, because it's such a like vintage vibe, obviously, that I really want to pick papers that will truly match the look and feel that I'm going for this journal. So what I'm also thinking of doing is sort of mirroring what I did with this altered book. So I have a playlist on my channel if you want to see how this came together, but like, look how chunky this is. This is always so satisfying to see. But what I did with the cover of this one is I actually just used a cutout image here to stick on the front, just with a glue stick. I think I thought that wouldn't it be fun to do a similar sort of thing and have some floral imagery in some of these gaps here. So I definitely don't want to fully cover anything that we've got going on here. I definitely want to work with what's going on here, because obviously you have all of the fonts and the writing and things, and that is what makes this so special, I think. And so I want to work around it and definitely keep a lot of those elements. So it's almost going to be me embellishing this cover, and I think I definitely want this to be a project that I'm going to work in throughout the year. So I don't want to rush any of this and, you know, finish it in a short period of time. I want it to be like this project where I was sort of coming back to it and adding things. I'm definitely seeing maybe like stitching in this cover's future. What do you think? Like sort of some stitching along the edge here with some just some slow stitching, like hand embroidery. I think that would be really nice, but there's definitely a lot to work on even just for the cover here. So I think I'm going to pick out some florals that I can attach to the cover, and then also just look at some of the pages that I've got here. So I pulled out one of my floral gardening books here, and this one has the most gorgeous illustrations that I thought would be perfect for using in something like this. And I think I might do a few different ones to complement the cover here and sort of have them around the edges maybe, so that I'm not covering up obviously too much of what is in the center. And because this says Will R Rose, I figured that I have to do maybe a rose at least as one of the flowers for this. So I'm gonna see if the rose is still in here for that, and maybe just pick some colors that complement each other. Some pinks, obviously. I feel like I just always gravitate towards the pinks when I do my journals lately, so maybe something like this. Now, I'm not gonna fussy cut all of that because I would be here all day and that looks really tedious. So what I'm probably gonna do is maybe put this upside down, and that way then I can cut off part of this. So let me just take this out so I can show you what I mean. So there is my flower cut out there, and I'm thinking it could potentially sit well either here or maybe peeking out of the edge here perhaps. And maybe the white as well against the brown paper could be nice. So things like this, they're really nice and delicate, but that's going to be way too complicated for me to cut out. So that can be saved for something more like a page where I'm working with it, you know, in its full form. Okay, so I've picked out a few here, so now it's time to cut these out. I think I've got enough flowers here, so I'm just going to see how they'll look like on the cover, and I think maybe we'll add some to the front, and then I don't know, we'll see if any make their way onto the inside as well. But I think I'm going to focus initially on the cover. So I think this one would look nice sort of coming off the edge here, and I do also want to try and layer them as well, just to have a bit of interest. So perhaps something like this, just to have, like I was saying, I almost want to use these gaps that we've got. So I've got a gap here, here, and kind of down here as well. Can't decide if I want the yellow flower on there or if I want to keep the pink. Maybe it's the leaves that are throwing me off because these are like lighter leaves. So those are the flowers that I have decided on for the front. So there's definitely still room for, I'm imagining, like some stitching, maybe a little bit of mark making, and potentially some painting as well, with some leaves. So I'm just going to set these aside, and actually I can include them in the little pocket here, tuck them in there for another day. So now I'm going to work on adding some pages to this journal. Like I said, I've got all sorts of papers here, and I really wanted to do a mix of some plainer pieces and then also, you know, the classic book pages, some recycled bits and pieces, and just have an eclectic mix of things within this journal. And obviously being conscious that I don't want to add too many pages because I don't want to put any sort of stress on the spines just because of the way that the journal will fold. So it's not going to sort of lend itself to like loads of bulk necessarily, but I still want to have obviously pages to choose from. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to sort of eyeball roughly how big I want the pages to be. So I'm kind of going to use this bit of stitching here as my guide so that I don't have pages sticking out too far at the top or the bottom, and then I also don't want them to come across too much because obviously when the journal folds, I don't want them to be in the way. And I think I'm just going to have some different sized pages as well, and everything doesn't need to be completely uniform or anything like that. So I'm just going to tear along here and then fold this in half. And obviously this is too wide, so let's just see how wide we want it. So if I was to add it here, I probably want it to come to maybe there-ish, because obviously we'll have the two signatures sort of next to each other. So let's just tear down here. And this way then I've got my sort of guide of roughly how big I want all of the rest of the pages to be, and I can just use this as a bit of a template almost. So Anything smaller is obviously fine, and then we don't want anything bigger than this piece of paper, and that way then it makes it just easier to add them to it. So you can see it will be like this. That would be one page, and then if I just use another piece here just to have as a second piece. So here are my two sort of templates. So as you can see, the pages will go here for this one, and then here for this one. Let's just add some book pages. So I'm probably going to add maybe like 7 pages to each. I think will be more than enough for something like this. So that's pretty much a perfect size. And as I said, I've got a mix of things here. So this is literally just a paper bag. So I think I'm going to tear down the middle here and then use one for either side. And this one here I'm going to add is just a translucent envelope, and I'm going to fold it in half so that when it's bound into the journal, I'm going to have some pockets here to work with, which I think will be interesting for a journal like this. And then I've also got an envelope as well, which will be a similar sort of thing. I'm going to fold this in half as well. It's pretty much the perfect size. And then I'm going to just take off the envelope part at the top, and that way then I also have some pockets to work with. So the idea is that I have these two parts here, and then I still have the middle section here which I can tuck things into, and I am kind of tempted to keep this little piece here and maybe turn it into another little signature and tuck it into here the more that I think about it. So let's add a few more pieces to this journal. I think definitely some brown paper. This is sort of a thinner brown paper, so I think this will work really well. The thing about adding smaller pages to your junk journals is that if you decide you want to have a wider page, for example, you can always extend it with different paper scraps, or you know, whatever you have to hand. So if you're thinking, oh, I haven't done like pages that are different sizes before and I don't know how to work with them, give it a go, and then like I said, you can always add extra bits to the pages to make them however big you want them to be in the end anyway. So it's not the end of the world if you've added pages that are too small. So let's add this piece here, and I just really love all of the texture that you get off this, and I think it will make for a really interesting page, especially the edge of this one here. So you can tell it's literally just from a paper bag from something. And you might notice I've also kept to a fairly neutral color palette as well, just to make it easy to work on the journal pages when it comes to adding things to them. And something like tissue paper as well that's really thin is also a great addition to a journal, because it doesn't add too much bulk and you can get some really interesting effects with working with tissue paper. So you know, I could always add this, for example, around the front here. So I'm just going to measure sort of roughly how much tissue paper I want, and then I'm just going to rip it, and this creates really lovely layered pages as well. Okay, so I think I've got enough in each of these signatures, so I'll just show you the papers that I've got here. So I have some brown paper, some book paper, got a variety of different papers in each with different sizes, so I think this will work well to give me a base for having something to work with and to respond to. So there's definitely lots of different textures. And then this one, I've actually added a piece of textured wallpaper here. It was just a sample, and I've been keeping this for ages, and I just decided to add it here. So the back page will be smaller, but like I was saying before, you can always add something to this. So I might come in afterwards and maybe extend that page. But this is the second signature here. So again, I've got an envelope page, but slightly different in terms of the colour, and then the same kind of mix of some book pages, some plain pages, and kind of alternating between them as well, so that I don't have 2 pages that are fully just text, which can be a little bit trickier to work with, but they always add some interest. So those are my 2 signatures. So now I'm going to sew these into the cover itself, and I'm just going to do the standard pamphlet stitch, so just the figure of 8 stitch, just to make things really easy. So I've got some really nice like green, almost a olive sort of colour that I thought would work really nicely with this journal because it's going to be visible. So I was thinking about what colour I wanted, and when it comes to measuring this, I kind of just go like 1, 2, 3, and then a little bit extra just for good luck. So I'm just going to grab a clip as well, just so that I can make sure all these pages don't sort of fly around as I am adding them to the cover itself. And something I always do ever since somebody left me a really helpful comment is that I make sure that either side of the string or thread that I'm tying is on opposite sides of this thread here in the middle, so that when it's tied around it, you're less likely for the bit that you've tied to kind of slip back through the hole that you've made. So that was a really helpful tip. I can't remember who left me that comment, but thank you to them, because now all my journals are like extra secure ever since I've started doing that to my bindings. So I'm just going to tie this a couple times and then cut off the excess. Okay, so there is the first signature sewn in, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the second one here. So those are my signatures now all sewn in, so you can see the journal folds this way to kind of open up this section of the journal, and then it also folds this way for this section of the journal. So obviously I will have to be a little bit careful with how chunky potentially this journal gets, but that is how the journal is looking with some of the cover decorated and pages set up ready to start using. And also in terms of a closure, at the minute I'm not quite sure what I want to do in terms of that, so I don't want to commit to anything, but I do have this really pretty green ribbon, so I thought that I could tie this around it for now. That would keep it closed, and I think it's also quite in keeping with the journal itself. It's a little bit long, so I might cut it slightly. So there it is, just with a piece of ribbon around it for now. I actually quite like that, but maybe we will do something a little bit more permanent, or I suppose I could fix the ribbon to the cover somehow, just so that it's a little bit more secure. But that is the finished journal. I hope you enjoyed joining me for the process of this, and I am really looking forward to working in this journal. I will see you in the next one.